then that we had roughly 10 minutes left in the question period. I'm going to round it off to 15 minutes if people would like, if members would like to ask questions of the Premier after he gives his statement. So, Mr. Premier, you have the floor to present your statement at this time, and members have a 15-minute window afterwards if they'd like to put questions to you. Is that agreeable by all? Thank you. And Premier, you can start by just requesting the members to yield to your request for suspension of the rule with Standing Order 14, and we can proceed from there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Standing Order 14 be suspended to allow me to make a statement on a matter of urgent importance to this honorable House.
No objections?
No objections, Mr. Speaker.
Continue, Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to make sure that the statement has been uploaded, as I did not have an opportunity to share directly with the opposition leader.
Okay. Mr. Lamb was in the process of trying to put on our site as soon as you were in the process of delivering now. I'll just confirm it's done. Mr. Lamb has just confirmed that it's on site. Members, if you go to the SharePoint on our site, on the page, you'll be able to pull up a statement and follow as the Premier reads the statement.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me firstly thank you and this honorable House for the opportunity to make this important statement at this stage of today's proceedings. It was 9 months ago today that the World Health Organization declared a global pandemic, and since that time we have witnessed a number of countries, near and far, wage war on the invisible but impactful virus that causes the disease we all know too well, COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, recognizing the growing sense of helplessness among some populations and the challenging manner in which those nations which pride themselves as first world countries set out to combat the virus, Bermuda acted early and decisively. Our immediate actions in compliance with public health advice allowed us to save lives and salvage some economic activity. In the months following March 11th's declaration, Bermuda implemented a phased approach to a new normal, which has seen our airport reopen, all trade and businesses resumed, and schools providing in-person instruction. On the basis of what we as a community achieved, we successfully created a program to attract others to our shores to work, while their own countries came to grips with the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, regrettably, and as has been the case in other countries, things have changed. Our country's status has been elevated from sporadic cases to clusters of cases, and today there are 7 confirmed clusters which are at the heart of this outbreak. Mr. Speaker, though we have many cases and several clusters, it is due to the excellent work by our health team in contacting and isolating, testing, and following up with confirmed cases that we have to date not moved to the WHO definition of community transmission. Mr. Speaker, it is against this backdrop that we take the actions I announced today. I am determined, as is the honorable member, the Minister of Health, and the entire government, that we do all we can to prevent the declaration of community transmission in Bermuda. Mr. Speaker, this means that it is essential that we must now reinstate some of the restrictions that contained the initial outbreak earlier in this pandemic period. Mr. Speaker, I can inform this honorable House and the public that in a meeting held last night, the Cabinet has approved the following measures, which will take effect from 6 a.m. on Saturday, the 12th of December. A curfew will be in effect from 11 p.m. until 6 a.m. daily. All businesses will be required to close at 10 p.m. The maximum permitted number in any group will be reduced further to 10. Gyms will be required to operate at reduced capacity, and those personal services like barbers, hairdressers, massage therapists, and spa technicians will not be permitted to provide those services that require a mask to be removed. Mr. Speaker, these restrictions are not imposed lightly or wantonly. They are guided by public health advice and based on the trends identified in both the average age of the confirmed positive cases and by the results of the contact tracing. The numbers do not lie, and the story they are telling cannot be ignored. This outbreak is being driven by residents, more specifically, young residents. More than a half of the new infections reported over the last 6 days are residents under the age of 30. Mr. Speaker, I think it is important to set out clearly why these actions are being taken now, as opposed to after we determine the impact of those changes made earlier this week. Mr. Speaker, in the past 6 days, we reported 86 new confirmed cases. It is the view of the Ministry of Health that the numbers will get worse before they get better. It is therefore essential that we implement further action now to avoid possible harsher action later. These additional actions, layered upon the actions that were announced earlier, will serve as a further insurance policy. If the actions that were taken earlier this week prove to be effective in halting this outbreak, that would be welcome. However, if they are not, then it makes more sense to layer further actions on top now versus waiting until December 22nd to judge their effectiveness. As I stated on Sunday, Mr. Speaker, we will review where we are as a country and where we stand on December 22nd to judge what our new next steps will be. I am conscious of the economic impact that this will have, and I am sensitive to the festive season in which this is taking place. And I know that people are tired and worn from the change that 2020 has brought to our lives. I certainly am, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, make no mistake, the threat is real. Thankfully, hospitalizations remain low, but these numbers of positive cases make that an ever-decreasing likelihood of continuing unchanged. People of a certain age will know the expression, joyful nights bring sorrowful days. Mr. Speaker, we must avoid a scenario where the actions of some leads to the death of others. Just as our actions in the spring saved lives, preserved health, safeguarded our most vulnerable, and gave us the foundation on which to found an economic recovery, so these preventative measures will do the same in December. Mr. Speaker, the adoption of these actions will form part of a revised set of public health regulations which will provide for the necessary exemptions from their provisions which previously applied. That process will be revived, and the Ministry of National Security will again be prepared to effect the permissions required for those whose movement within the hours of curfew must be sanctioned. And Mr. Speaker, the applications will be on the government website at gov.bm. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, members are advised that stronger public health guidance will be issued to encourage less community activity and urge residents not to mix households for at least the next 14 days. Mr. Speaker, many businesses have maintained a return to remote working. I am advising both public and private sectors that the strong public health advice is, if you can work remotely, you should do so. The head of the public service is already determined how this will impact the front-facing operations of government, and public sector employees will be advised by permanent secretaries and heads of departments. Mr. Speaker, with the growing number of people who are either testing positive or identified as close contacts of those who have, there is a need to ensure that clusters are contained and do not extend. I am therefore grateful to the management of the Cocoa Reef Hotel, who have agreed to offer a specially negotiated rate of $79 per night for those who are unable to quarantine effectively at home. Mr. Speaker, the skilled and committed men and women of the Ministry of Health are operating at full bore in the testing, tracing, and monitoring work this pandemic has caused. The scale of this outbreak is testing their systems and taxing their stamina. They are meeting the challenge daily, but it is difficult, and they are becoming stretched. Our government lab received over 1,800 samples yesterday for testing, smashing any previously recorded daily record. Additional help has been called in, and additional resources are being brought to bear. Why do I raise this, Mr. Speaker? I raise it because the moment the health system breaks and the people within it cannot maintain the pace at which they must operate to contain outbreaks such as this, we run the risk of entering the realm of community transmission. And at that point, we cannot say what Bermuda will encounter. One thing is for certain, it will certainly jeopardize our hard-earned progress to date, and we must all work together to ensure that does not happen. This means that we all have to play our parts. First, Mr. Speaker, I encourage residents, do not be your own doctor. Follow public health advice. If you haven't been exposed, please do not take up valuable testing slots for those who may have been exposed. Do not book multiple tests on multiple days. Speaker, the booking system is being modified to prevent this. But one of the challenges, Mr. Speaker, is that persons were booking multiple tests on multiple different days, taking away the limited testing slots. The third thing, Mr. Speaker, is to be patient. In Bermuda, we are spoiled because we're used to receiving our results in sometimes as little as 6 hours. The results will take a little bit longer than normal, Mr. Speaker. So I ask residents to be patient. Mr. Speaker, now is not the time to panic. Now is not the time for Bermudians to start fending for themselves. Now is not the time for us to turn on each other. Now is the time to remember that we are really in this together, and it is essential that we embrace that community spirit that is so important to our island's progress today. Mr. Speaker, as the Honorable Minister of Health said earlier today, vaccines are on the way. We have technology launched today in the form of the We Health Bermuda app, so that people who are exposed can receive anonymous exposure notifications. We have the tools at our disposal, and we have an amazing team of committed healthcare workers who will continue this fight. Mr. Speaker, though some may wish, now is not the time for pointing fingers, as there will be plenty of time for examination over what happened with this outbreak and how exactly did we get to this point. Lessons have been learned, and we have increased the protections at our border to bolster the protections provided to our country. The Ministry of Health has revised activities allowed for travelers, and all persons who arrive in Bermuda will be subject to those restrictions. Additionally, with the new agreement announced yesterday with U.S. retail giant Costco to get a pretest, there is no longer an excuse for residents to not obtain a valid pretest prior to boarding. Therefore, the fee for a resident to return to Bermuda without a pretest will be increased from $30 to $300. This increase will discourage residents from boarding flights without a valid pretest and will help to fund the enhanced monitoring of those persons arriving without a pretest. Mr. Speaker, while we enhance our protections, we must also support those who will be negatively impacted by the actions the government has taken. At 5 p.m. today, persons who have not been able to work due to closure notices that were issued effective on Tuesday, or who have been served with a quarantine notice and cannot work remotely, can apply to receive support. The Minister of Finance has stated that any completed application received by 5 p.m. on Monday will be paid by next week, Wednesday, December 16th. Verified full-time employees of bars and nightclubs who are closed will be eligible to receive $1,000, representing 2 weeks of the unemployment benefit. The application will be live at 5 p.m. today and will be able to be accessed at uba.gov.bm. Again, that is uba.gov.bm. The information required to apply will be as follows, Mr. Speaker. Full name, social insurance number, mailing address, contact details, a bank statement without a bank balance to ensure payment to the correct bank account, and employer name and contact information. Mr. Speaker, I know that this is not the news this government wanted to deliver, or that the people we serve in this honorable House want to hear. However, Mr. Speaker, I firmly believe that these are the correct steps to take. Mr. Speaker, I would like to acknowledge the support of the Leader of the Opposition, not only in the statement of support he graciously issued earlier this week, but also for his confirmation of support of these new measures when we spoke by phone earlier today. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want to pay special homage to the men and women of our health and pandemic response teams, the people manning the phones, people collecting test samples, people processing coronavirus tests, people communicating to residents, tracing down contacts, assessing businesses, designing guidance, drafting laws, handling arriving passengers, enforcing quarantine, and responding to the media. Mr. Speaker, these men and women are our army in this war, and it is our country's responsibility to support their fight. Mr. Speaker, I commend these measures for the support of the whole House and would ask that honorable members join me in this all-out effort to keep Bermuda safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Premier. Mr. Premier, but before you started your statement, I had indicated that some time had been left in the question and answer period this morning, and I was going to extend it. Having heard your statement, I'll stick to that, but I really think it's all in the best interest of everyone. I would trust that everyone would be understanding of it. But members, you are able to ask questions now if you so wish to.
Mr. Speaker, how long will this question period last?
We had 10 minutes, just over 10 minutes or so left on the clock before. I had said I was going to round it to 15 minutes, but the clock is on now. Would anyone like to put questions?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. If the opposition leader doesn't have a question to start, I'll put a question.
Put a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honorable Premier for the statement delivered today. Question for the Honorable Premier. On page 2, I believe, the Premier says this outbreak is being driven by residents, more specifically young residents. And in the past, the Premier's called for zero tolerance, and they've said that failure to adhere to public health guidelines has caused the increase in the number of cases. The Honorable Premier, what is being done to the people who are not following these guidelines as far as enforcements that's taking place in our community? Because obviously it's up to us, and we have fallen short on what we've expected to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that in conjunction between the Ministry of Health and Ministry of National Security, there's been a number of closure notices which have been issued. I know that there were closure notices issued last weekend to businesses that were not complying with public health rules. But Mr. Speaker, I will say this, as I had expressed in statements made earlier, my disappointment that the zero tolerance approach that the government had wished had not been adopted as soon as we had wished it would have been. That much being said, Mr. Speaker, I'm not trying to point fingers or cast blame anywhere. So I appreciate the honorable member's question. And the view from the government's perspective is the matters of enforcement which lie with the police, we've made our matters clear there. The matters of enforcement which fall to us, insofar as closure notices be issued to persons who are not obeying public health guidance, the government and the Minister of Health has issued those notices.
Thank you.
Supplementary?
Yes, just one supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
The Honorable Premier, on page 4, I believe now, second paragraph, Premier, you mentioned we run the risk of entering the realm of community transmission, and at that point, we cannot say what will Bermuda encounter. So we've gone from 2 clusters to 7 clusters in a quick period of time. How can we be assured, Premier, that we are not at the community transition point at this time?
Mr. Speaker, we can be assured that we are not at this point at this time because of the various metrics that are done by the WHO definitions. Community transmission is where the health system loses the ability to detect, track, trace, and isolate cases. One of the specific metric is the ability of the health system to contact 100% of cases within 24 hours. Their metric is 80%. We are able to contact 100% of cases during that time. So we are keeping up with the metrics which have been laid out. The truth is, however, that it is becoming stretched. And so from that aspect and avenue, we do run the risk of moving there. Our teams are confident that they will be able to constrain this. As I said, we have tremendous testing capacity in the country in order to make sure that we can keep up with this. But the fact is that we do have some worrying signs and trends where we have some clusters which are very, very large, and those will lead to ongoing transmission. Once they're linked to clusters, once they can be identified, once they can be quarantined, we don't have the issue of community transmission. But if we have multiple unlinked cases that will continue, that the health system lose the capacity to track and isolate, then we'll move to that level. So we've been assured that we are not at that level yet. But if the trends continue and we're not able to reverse it, person's behavior does not modify, and there are continued stages of ongoing transmission with very large clusters, we could get to the point where our teams are not able to keep up.
Thank you, Premier. I'll turn it over to colleagues.
Thank you. Does any other member have a question for they'd like to put to the Premier at this time?
Mr. Speaker, I do.
Member Jackson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask the Honorable Premier, given the age group of this particular spread, are we finding that there are more asymptomatic cases?
Thank you very much. I would not have the specific data at my fingertips for the number of cases that are asymptomatic or not. Thank the minister, the member for his question and the ability to clarify.
Thank you. Member supplementary? No supplementary?
Supplementary.
No supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Chairman.
Call for the question just asked?
Of the question just asked.
Go ahead.
Given. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Premier, just you mentioned that the rule of 10, as it were, is for public gatherings. So would it not also apply to private gatherings, or can more than 10 gather in
concerns and testing that is going on, it would appear as if we're at the point of overwhelming. What exactly are we doing to help alleviate that? The reason I'm asking is if you can't get an appointment, get a test by December 22nd, and you actually do have COVID, therein lies a major problem with spread.
I thank the honorable member for his question, and I'll answer the question this way. It was along the lines in which I made in our statement, insofar as that persons and individuals should not try to be their own doctor. If there is someone who has been in close contact with a case, if there is someone who has been contacted by a contact tracer, if there is someone who is symptomatic, or someone who's been referred by their doctor, there are multiple different avenues for testing that takes place. So the public testing that is able to be booked online is for public testing. But the fact is that there's a lot more testing that is happening than this. So for instance, where there are these cases and close contacts, etc., they are not being told to wait until the 24th or when is the next time to book. They are being accommodated in multiple different locations. These are the open slots, but the reminder and the plea of which I'm giving to persons, and I know that the teams of health are going in contact in person, deleting appointments, is we're finding people that are booking multiple appointments. So they've just booked appointments every 2 days. So that's not the purpose of this testing. And so I'm asking persons to make sure that they are being kind. I'm asking persons to make sure that they're being considerate and recognize that if you are not at risk of exposure, if for the last 14 days you've kept yourself at home, you haven't done anything crazy, you haven't been out in a place where people were gathered without wearing masks and other things like that, and a risk of transmission, by and large, I want persons to go ahead and make sure that testing capacity is used for those persons who actually need it. There is additional testing capacity which has been brought online. There is additional testing capacity that is being brought online. And as I indicated, we had over 1,800 samples arrive at the government lab yesterday. That by far smashes any record, almost twice as much as the highest number that it ever received before. So we certainly are doing the testing. Private labs are being recruited to assist with making sure we process samples as well. And I want to also thank the doctors who have pitched in to make sure that we can continue getting samples tested. So we are working through those processes, certainly, MP Cannoneer, and I thank you for your question.
Thank you. Is there a supplementary? Are you good? Any further questions?
Yes, supplementary.
Supplementary?
Yeah, just
supplementary.
Is the Premier in a position to say what he believes to be that number on a daily basis to be testing that would be over the limit of being able to handle?
Well, let's put it this way. On Tuesday or Sunday night, when the Minister of Health, the CMO, and myself addressed the country, we set the testing target at 1,000 per day.
Okay.
Again, we received 1,800, so we are far exceeding the targets, and it's good. That is a good response to be able to get that, and we'll have the volume, and we'll work for the volume, and we'll use the private labs, and we'll get through that volume. It may not be the 6 hours that people are used to. It might be 36 hours, it might be a little bit longer, but they are working for that volume. Additional resource being brought in to make sure to supplement the team that is up there. And as I said, private labs are being used. So our target was 1,000 a day. We're far exceeding that target. And so I want persons to recognize and understand, just because they're not seeing appointments that are available does not mean that people are not being tested. A full 3% of the country was tested yesterday, far in excess of any national testing number in any country that you would have found throughout the entirety of this pandemic.
Thank you. No further question? Any other member?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
And we're right on, well, we've got about a minute left and then 15 minutes.
MP Pearman.
MP Pearman?
Premier, you've stated that people must operate to contain the outbreaks such as this. Could you assist us with what sort of cleaning is going on in respect of public transportation, buses and ferries and the like, and what's being done to maintain contract tracing on those using public transportation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will not be able to answer that question specifically. I know that the Minister of Transport may be able to answer the cleaning regimen specifically. I do know that they have a cleaning regimen which has been approved by the Ministry of Health, certainly in that case and instance.
Thank you. Supplementary?
But can I assist with one thing, MP Pearman? Though contact tracing may be difficult on public transportation because I'm uncertain if there's sign-in sheets for persons who arrive, what I can state is that contact tracing would be very easy on public transportation as everyone installs the WeHealth app on their phones. And that will be able, whether or not they're in Wi-Fi or not in Wi-Fi, as long as they have Bluetooth, if they have data or don't have data, as long as they have their Bluetooth turned on and connect to data at some point in time at a Wi-Fi location, they will be able to continue to monitor that exposure. So that will certainly help and assist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary.
Yes, supplementary.
Premier, just in terms of contact tracing, can you give us where the current numbers are today in terms of current cases?
The Minister of Health will be announcing that at our press conference at 5:45 p.m. I do not have any numbers from the Ministry of Health yet today.
Any further question?
Thank you.
No further question? And we're right on 46 seconds left on the 15 minutes. So thank you, members. Premier, thank you for updating us, and we understand the severity of it. And I trust the message that will come out of this chamber to all who are listening, that it's up to us. If we're going to make our island safe again, we have to all do our part to practice and take advantage of the precautions that we all should be taking. With that said, we'll now move back to the order, which was order number